당은 그제 다 기부 딩나 통을 남기린 발로 샤서고 고조시 그제 당저 가르려나 기부 딩당로 딩기 갑도 냠는 체기 조디 가르려나 아주 탈바되니기 로 자야디다 고미야디 조디래 탈바 세디 그래서 당저 탈바 세디 가르려나 아니 레단 녀모바 왕기 라와메바 코발레 깨와 림비기 깨와 델레 탈고 고레스 델레 탈비기 다 데니기 끼유 녀모바디 차상 빵비기 사보나 제바 빵베 빵바딜라 탈발라 고레스 지산디 돈느냐 디 톱되기 톱고도 셈베 돈냐게 삼바차 장고미야디 다 탈바더니 로세야지 온두시 그래제 아 그센디시 다 탈바더니 요로 깨와라 아나 코위 둥알레 탈고도 셈베 코위 둥알레 끼엔지 마토바 있나 아니 코위 둥알라 탈되게 삼바 기고 말아 디네사 코위 둥알들 코위 둥알을 끼엔다 끼엔톤에다 통용도다 코위 둥알들 탈고도 제산데 탈 코위 둥알야 유디가레스네 레다 녀몬발레트네 기 용구도 제산 레다 녀몬바디 빵베 빵바 탈바서 토구도 셈비게 데디 고미야데 가서 탈바던 로건바시고 제산 데디 냠len 제바데 고미야데 다 기부 딩기
Last week, having completed the trainings that are in accordance with the practitioner of initial capacity, we started to look at the trainings that are in accordance or shared with a practitioner of intermediate capacity. So, practitioner of intermediate capacity is a practitioner who has given rise to an uncontrived and a spontaneous wish striving to achieve liberation from samsara. And in order to give rise to such a mind, such an intention, then one has to understand very clearly what it is that one wants to be liberated from, which is, in brief, taking uncontrolled rebirth in the suffering realms of samsara, or to express that differently, taking uncontrolled rebirth due to the power of contaminated karma accumulated by our own afflicted minds. And it's this process that leads us to take uncontrolled rebirth again and again. So it's attaining freedom or liberation from this process of uncontrolled rebirth in cyclic existence. This is what freedom or liberation means. Freedom from uncontrolled rebirth in samsara due to the power of contaminated karma and afflictions. In order to, and we also looked last week that in order to give rise to such an intention striving for liberation, this can only come about in dependence on intense reflection on the suffering nature of cyclic existence, on the suffering reality of cyclic existence, as well as the origin or the causes that lead to such a suffering state, namely the contaminated karma accumulated through the afflictions. And this is then what gives rise to the wish to be freed of the afflictions, to be freed of this uncontrolled rebirth within cyclic existence. And this is the objective, the aim of a practitioner of intermediate capacity.
어디인자 코와세디 레다 녀모 라와메바 레다 녀모 왕기 엔케와 림비기 아니 풍보가 보텔라 코와시고다 코와 텔라 라와기네요 말 먼저 텔레 레다 녀모베 샹와도 송와데 지산 레다 녀모베 디기 샹와도 송와인자 텔라 라와메바레지레 지산디 레다 녀모 왕기 라와메바 기비 다 풍보가 보텔라 코와세지 다 디기 니 타고 거래 델레 타고 거래 가서 델레 마타와 정아서 풍보데 게디나 레다 녀모 왕기 중위 풍보디 인자 만줄라 나 요래 차 요래 시야 요래 근데 강아만 오태도 차상 니 풍보디 여봐 인자 니 용고래 진짜 레다 녀모 왕기 중위 풍보디 매봐 있나 만줄라 풍보 수보지 여봐 있네 레다 녀모 왕기 중위 풍보디 매나 내가 좀 나요 말에 차요 말에 근데 시야요 말에 아니 데네자 아니 강아세디 강할래 타르고로 제가 전주 셈바 파바당 아니 베니 자좀바 하제 하미게 자좀바 되게 풍부되게 ane an sangi gi kupung re janju semba pabi ku sugi pungpodi gi re ane lame nyangal le dibi ge jachomba deju pungpodi gi le da nyomo ongi jungwa mare insan konsul na yo mara cha yo mara gango cha yo ma hiya yo mara wada odi ko 강아 요 말에 제가 가는 졸라디 여바디 가서 풍보디 레다 녀모 온거 주위기 풍보디 여반장 가서 강아 쳐야디 디차고 제사디 강아 딜레 타고도 라기도 레다 녀모 온거 주 풍보디 레 타고 고라 가서다
Last week in looking at this topic, we looked at it from the perspective as just mentioned, and we also looked at it from a differing perspective in that through the state that we strive to be liberated from is the state of perpetual, uncontrolled rebirth in cyclic existence due to the power of our contaminated karma and afflictions. This is what we strive to be liberated from, freed from. And to express that then differently, this process of uncontrolled rebirth means we keep retaking or we keep acquiring these contaminated physical and mental aggregates. And it's these physical and mental aggregates that are the basis upon which we experience suffering. So last week we looked at that for as long as we have these contaminated physical and mental aggregates, we will suffer because we have the basis for suffering. It's having acquired again and again these contaminated aggregates, we experience suffering such as being born in an uncontrolled manner in samsara, age, we get sick, and we die, all in an uncontrolled manner. And in this way, we suffer. Those beings who, independent on having given rise to a motivation such as an uncontrived wish for liberation and have achieved the result, such as the foe destroyers, the hero and solitary realizer foe destroyers, as well as other practitioners who are Arya Buddhas or Arya Bodhisattvas, they are in a completely different state from ourselves in that their aggregates are not contaminated. They do not take uncontrolled rebirth in samsara. They are freed, are liberated from uncontrolled rebirth in samsara. They're liberated from having contaminated aggregates, this basis of suffering. So they, not having this basis of contaminated aggregates, experience no suffering. So these are, again, the hero and solitary realizer foe destroyers or arhats, they have attained nirvana, as well as Arya Bodhisattvas and Arya Buddhas. They are beyond the process of uncontrolled rebirth in samsara. They are liberated from that. And to express that differently, they are liberated from having contaminated aggregates. So this is the goal that a practitioner of intermediate capacity is striving for. And here we're looking at the practices that are shared with such a practitioner.
다시 말이봐 세야지 당아 저기 녀모바 계획이 되차 콘도 계획이 유예디래 제가 되차 콘도 계네 될 때네 되차 콘도 계 되차 콘도 계와 될 때네 콘도 지네네 심지어 소주자다 신 소주자라서 봐 되차던 콘도 관계 아니 신지 구마고와 신 소주봐 신 고하던 준셰발라서 봐 되네 아니 로임제 발라서 다 말하려는데 디원게다 량안 봐사 되네 밀게 가서 간주게 동안 연구하다 지네게 안에 지금 어두신 책으로 되네상 녀모바게기 유자와 된 아주 다시 말이 봐야들이 지상 다시 말이 봐야지 난 담보가 저기 다 코월이게 규딜해다 녀모바래 디나디 자위 규수를 자와 수레선 다시 말이 봐래 지상 디 다시 말이 봐대 방고거래 지상 디코 유코 메어서 샤바이나 디네 녀모바게 하면래 녀모바게 하면서 능한주 le ngambasa mere le ngambasa ne mena dungonyo ge le gi wongi rawa me ba ki phumbo de le yo mare me ba dine zanga jugi khowale tartu gore jesa khowale tartu ya la nga jugi kharab me ba so gore sene dase marik pa se di das dipango gore di me ba so go cha gore.
Therefore, last week we are looking at how we looked at what it is that we strive to be liberated from, or strive to attain freedom from, which is either, we can be expressed either as uncontrolled rebirth in samsara, or having the basis for suffering, these contaminated physical mental aggregates. And moreover, we looked at what the cause for uncontrolled rebirth, as well, or to express it differently, the cause for having these contaminated aggregates, and that cause is the contaminated karma accumulated through our afflicted minds. But that itself has a deeper cause, a root cause, and that root cause is ignorance, in particular the ignorance of self-grasping. So the root cause then, as we looked at last week, of all suffering, of this entire process of cyclic existence, is the ignorance of self-grasping. It's through the arisal, it's through having this ignorance of self-grasping that all our other afflicted minds, through grasping at the self as existing truly, desire comes for the self to have what it wants, attachment. Then repulsion for what it's believed to harm this self-existent self, aversion, and so forth. All the afflictions stem from this root cause. And the mere arisal of these afflictions leads to the accumulation of negative karma. Moreover, under the influence of these afflictions, we create physical and verbal karma, such as taking life, such as stealing, such as sexual misconduct, such as lying, taking advantage of others, stealing from others. All of this follows through this process from the ignorance of self-grasping, the wide variety of afflictions follow, and then physical and mental activity. And all of these lead to the accumulation of karma, and this leads to the continued experiences of suffering and uncontrolled rebirth and the attainment of the containment of these physical and mental aggregates, which are the basis for our suffering. So then last week we identified what the root cause of all our suffering is, the actual creator. Maybe that's not the right word. The root cause of all the root cause of our samsara.
Ane dasin marik bahasa di Ganesh tu sinangan jugi simju chega ina. Ta penengan misoso rangi kowalu koya nyomaji gyudi soso rangi gyule yore dasin marik badi mato soso rangi gyule dasin marik badi mena mishanda ge soso le nyoba khariki bene soso gyule nyomaji mare jingmarwa jesanga soso rangi kowalu koya gyutza wade dasin marik badi soso gyule yorwada 다 여바인다 다서 말이 봐서 간치 두 시대가서 두 심죽 제바이나 당아서 두 삼단 소소나 삼단에 나 세야지 소소나 줘봐다 시대 나 세야지 나 두고 나 디고서 나 세베 삼로 줘다 지사다 나 세베 삼로 텔이야 나로들라 나디 간치 난구도 랍나 간치 난고래서 봐 삼다에 나 두 삼단에 나 세야 삼단에 샹다 가야 삼마다지 나 세야 삼다에나 아니 아줄로들 가는 거서 나디 소수 풍부 딜레 로수 그런 뭐니 예대바시 능거다 가줄래 두스 능거래 지선디 나와 나시 다가라 두 섬짐바딜라 띵아 라시 유튜브 짐바서 나 가사 다신시고 다신 마릭바시 딜레고래 지선 두 따이든 가 세디 강라에 마도와 풍부 딜레 마도와 라왕 그런 뭐니 주바지 라왕 뭐니 줍디에 예바시 능거래 나와 나신 다가라 요래 섬진디게 딜로딜라 다신 말이 바라고 다딩아 주기를 yor 다디
Having identified then the root cause of our samsara, then we think, so where is this root cause, this ignorance of self-grasping to be found? It's only found within our own continuum. It's not to be found in anyone else's continuum or separate from someone else's continuum. It's found there. In other words, the root cause of our own individual samsara is found within our own continuum. So for each of us, for each ordinary samsaric being, the root cause of their own individual samsara is found within their own continuum, and that is their own individual ignorance that grasps at the self as existing in a way that is not in accordance with reality. So then how does this self appear to us to exist? How does it appear to us to exist which is not in accordance with reality then? So this is something we each individually need to investigate. How does the self appear to us? How does the I appear to us? How does our self-identity appear to us? So this is the crucial first step of the meditation. We need to see how the I appears. So generally, it appears to us as if it is separate from our aggregates, as if it's independent from our physical and mental aggregates, as if it's not connected to our physical and mental aggregates. That's how it appears. Then, a mind that is not in accordance with reality, a mind of ignorance, grasps at the self as existing in this way. So this is a mind of ignorance, because it's not in accordance with reality, and it grasps at the self as existing in a mistaken, in a wrong way. And this is the ignorance of self-grasping. And again, this mind of ignorance, which is a mind of ignorance because it's not in accordance with reality, it grasps at a self as existing in the way that it appears, which is independent or separate from the physical and mental aggregates.
nga sia de kan su yore sem be sam lo khong khu go ma ji dang zu ji din na ta chue gi thon ne lob jong ra ma che bai na ane di nga sia di ji dang nga sia di be je dang ki di na di be je dang ru go ma ta nga sia di lo ya kan ne nang gu du ji na wa na xin ji du ye min du se je ba sam lo khong khu go ma ba ta nga zu gi da du xian de da nga zu gi ji gi chue nyam ne ji nyam mo pang thang se 지시에 녀모에 게 간에 스키고래 제유 간에 스레 다 빠야를 매바 간에 쇠고래서 제바 지어도 갑라 지상은 나 세배가 라신 주바진베 진바데 녀모에 자와리 안당아 세대가 줄려도 제바 지어도 갑라 나 세대 소솔야 징하여 녀래 제사당아 칼라사고라 나 두고래 나 나기도 나 기우도 세죠래 두시당아 두 섬다능하 세 롤바 간데 책도 지방아 주다 차다는 일 하고 고 말봐 당도 심주진 제바제 소솔야 두 전에다 검자선디 제바제네 제검식으로 하다가도 검자라 제검다 조금 이용고래 제사 당보 다음에 봐라 제검제고래 대 제검제디 제나 하고 사는 다음에 또 사는 되는 조검제 책고로 봐 제사데 제검제 당보 제바 고주발라 간에 제고선 나도 나 세야도 소솔야 로들야 나 세데 간에 난거도 딘낭외기 낭나자 하고 그래. 당외진 거고. 근데 낭도 선배게. 진나와 나신 디진디겐데. 낭도 낭탕기 로려 간에 신낭고 딘외선 거래. 근데 외선 거 장안 저기 도 소소 되지네. 나 세야디 나줄야 로려네. 간에 또 선배게 삼도 지금 하세 삼당에도 아니 가서 로려 가는 것은 나도 풍보라 맞대봐. 그런 원이 줍디 유디겐 나 지나와로 샤고를 되고 지기 유딩으로 샤고로 와 지나 디니기 샤고를 디니기 나와 나신다 어디는 아직 나 요래 섬지 어디는 나와 나신 요래 섬비 짐바디 nga rashi duba jimbe jimba la gore nga dadu duba jimbe dasin marik pase disi gore jisa denik jimba yore sembe tanga de yore sembe nga dul jimba ngonju wa se de yoma da kasa kunta se de yoma engi de yode jisa di jimba de yore sembe nga dul le le ba ko tu ma ya jeba ma je na ha ko tu ma ro jisa dang bo ne on du shi ne jeba je sam dang ko ya cha go ro 랭기에 군다 말이야 저래 한들 군다 요 말이야
This investigation or this investigation or the conversation that we're having now prior to the investigation as to how the self appears, how it exists, this is generally not something that ordinary people think about, let alone engage in conversation about. But if one has a wish to attain actual liberation, real freedom from suffering, this is the crucial topic to investigate. Because the root cause of suffering is this ignorance of self-grasping. And until it is eradicated, one will continue to suffer. As long as the root cause remains, suffering cannot cease. So therefore this is a topic of great importance for those who long for freedom from pain, freedom from misery. So, on the one hand, there is an I that exists. I am sitting here talking, you are sitting there listening. Earlier, you were walking here, you were sitting, standing, eating, talking. So there is an I doing these things. But the I we're interested in here is how this I appears to us, how the I or the self appears to us, our sense of self-identity, how this appears to us. And then to get a feel of how the self appears to us, we need to be aware and investigate, to use the skills of analysis in meditation, so analytical meditation. Once we've come to, we've gone through the process of investigation and come to see that the self does not exist in the way that it appears, that it's selfless, then we engage in the second type of meditation, placement. But first it's analytical. This meditation starts with then coming to see how the self appears to us, the manner in which it appears to us. And that is, we need to get a feel for how the self appears, that seeing how it appears to be separate or independent from our physical and mental aggregates. Then the process is, that's how the self appears, and then a mind that is not in accordance with reality, so a mind of ignorance, grasps at it, apprehends the self as existing in this way. This is the ignorance that grasps at the self, so the ignorance of self-grasping. Or to express it in a different way, the ignorance of true grasping, grasping at the self as existing truly or inherently or by its own self-existent nature. So this is a mind of ignorance, and it is the root cause of our suffering. And for us, this is not an acquired ignorance, it's an innate ignorance of self-grasping.
That Bendigo samta, Bendigo that do samta, that Bendigo nga said nga zu pumbo nga bo kan lai ma de bo khorong wen zhu de nga zu lo na wa na xin ga di da, Bendigo na wa na xin ga di da, yo ba yin de ga ha tu sa da nga zu je ba che wa da, je ba nga zu pumbo de la, dang bo pumbi de do su yu pumbo de la, yu me je ba yin da, Bendigo ga de ngi la ba de be lam na, da la ba de ma re, ar se ne la ba de Bendigo lakwa de rebes na ngan ju ge kar sam ta sang lakwa de ngi lakwa re la ma do su su gi nga di re sam go ma ro chi sang ngan ju ngi lakwa re sam da nga su kha sha di lakwa re sa chi go ro chi sang lakwa di ya nga re me do chi sa da ani ji nga ju gi me su bo ne lakwa da ngo go da kang ba da cha sa du su che ba na chi sang din ge na na shi nga di ga wa du sin nga ju su bu de ne yu ni ye yo ma re 그래서 변한 저기 나서 라바로치 매바제 제네 유샤바이나 라바 매바네 나디 차도로 봐 진짜 나디 매바체 나디 나도 나와나지 나디 요르디 진짜 라바데 나 말에 진짜 이다 강바데 나레면도 수부데 나레면도 다음에나 아는 가서 수부 난기 닝다 땅아지 되게 샤타 루고 샤상도 제바진 니 되는 나서 나와나지 나디 균이에요 말에 그래서 내가 나이든 하디 그래서 난 거서 강라에 맞도 그런 원이 두버지 나도 유견 강라마 랑원이 두배 난거 데니스 나와나시 여배는 아주 풍보디 가르스는 유견 깨라딘데 겨봐라 가르스는 아주 풍보데 칼라데 야고 마사바는 야디 깨진 바베 수부교 차려야다 칼라 사바나 야 수불이야 야고 차야나 수부게 당당의 차야되게 세상 유견 깨를 되려 봐지 내가 봐야 안 자유 코로나 마기르는 아미기 안 수부나 마기하자 유단 다고 청주지 마대요. 디 체제 전부 차되게. 세상 안에도 풍보디 유단 기인질을 뛰는 중에 교어도되게 시작하래. 세상 다든가 사나도야 돼. 칼라에 마대요 코로나는 줍두베 나와시네 거래. 세상 대 풍보디다 풍보디 가리면 가서 가디 풍보디 유단 기인 안에 지금 저기 기망고질을 뛰는 초되어 봐시래. 세상 디 기인디게 야고 맞춰나 풍보디 잘라두고 매바 차도. 세상 디 나도 규로 기인가라 마데 나와나 랑원이 주바자디 풍부이 되는 균에 자에 예 민두어 선비게 내 제바지야 삼다 직책으로 가.
The first step then of the meditation is to try and get a sense for how our self or our sense of identity, self-identity, appears to us. We should then see that it appears as if it is independent or not influenced by our physical mental aggregates. It's something separate from them, something other to them. And if that is the case, it's separate from our physical and mental aggregates, independent from them, it should be findable. So if it is self-existent, it should be findable. So that's the first step of the meditation. The second step then is when we have a feel for how the I appears, now we start the investigation, trying to find the I. Because if it exists in this separate or independent or self-existent way that it appears, it should be findable like that. We start then with the physical, the aggregate, the form aggregate. And we see, so is this independent I to be found anywhere within our physical aggregate? So if we take a limb, say the hand, is this hand the I? And of course it's not, because we refer to our hand as my hand or our hand. So we see there's a relationship between this limb and the sense of I. So it's not independent. There's clearly a relationship. And likewise with any other body part, whether it's coarse or a subtle aspect of the physical body, it's not independent from our sense of I. There's a relationship between the two. Moreover, if we sever or amputate any part of our body, and we say our arm is amputated and placed over there, we'll still have a sense of self. It won't be that our sense of self is now with the amputated limb. So in this way, we can start to see that our body and our I our body cannot be our I. Our I cannot be found within our body. Moreover, we also know quite easily that this body certainly changes. From birth to now, it's changed a lot. We know that if we overeat, it changes. If we don't eat enough, it changes. So we have experience of this. So this shows that our body is dependent on causes and conditions. And it also shows that our sense of I cannot be found anywhere within our body, whether we look at coarse levels or subtler levels. So no matter how strongly we identify with our body is not I. Our sense of I is not to be found within this body.
제가 왕시 딩아 세딩아 나와나시 나지베 람나 다 디마레 가서 나도 니후가 왕시 차상 가사래 이내 나요라 나니도 요래서 그러다 나요라고 제가 나요래서 제가 왕시 딩 나리미도 제가 왕시 매나야 나도 제가 다 왕시 되는 예미도 매나 단나가서 이기 셰벌잖아 초와 대화딩 아레벨라네 말에 나도 소유 둥아녀도 요가블라 나요라 이나 초와 대화도 요 말 세상 초와 대화대야 나리미도 한 초와 둥아데레벨라나 말에 나 기부 초와 대화 기부 요디가블라 초와 둥아도 요 말에 이내 나요래 세상 초와 둥아대야 나리미도 초와 대화대 나리미도 안다 초와 땅님된 아레벨라나 초와 땅님대야 말에 가서 나도 둥아당 초와 대화다 둥아온 기부가블라 땅님된 매 말에 이내 나요와 세상다 나세 제바치나 두 초회되는 유메 제바치나 초회되는 예매래. 지상 소화되기 차상 아니 규단기 즉 유지다 체내 되는 지 마디베 왕기 예 아니 류리야 베네라자 정모다 빼지 체어도 아니야 소화 동아기 용거로 아니 그 되는 게 깨를 되는 기고래 양 류리야 차유라자 슈슈 첨벌려도 대리한 소화 동아기야다 양 찬용물리도 갑라자 찬용물리도 소화 대화 용야 안데인자 데 소화게 되게나 아니 유다게 샹을 되네 되는 줍디게 차고래 그래서 디네자 땅하 세딩을 나와나시 가디 강라에 마도바 랑응원이 줍 나와나시 가디 초회되는 예미도 그래서 왕시되는 예미도 초회되는 예미도 선비 두 제바지도 소화다 왕시 강게 되는 가디 통하매어다
The first step then of the meditation was to get a sense for how our eye appears to us. The second step was to engage in that investigation to see if we can find the eye existing this way, and that started with looking in the physical aggregates. Now the third step is to look in the mental aggregates. Mental aggregates can be understood can be divided in many different ways because there is such a variety of consciousnesses. Those who have been coming to the awareness and knowers classes will be aware of the variety of awarenesses and knowers. So we now need to investigate this self that appears to be independent of our physical mental aggregates, that has not been found amongst our physical aggregates. Can we find it anywhere amongst our variety of consciousnesses, of minds, our mental aggregates? So if we think about something like the mental consciousness, this, even if when it goes into a subtler state such as sleep, then there's still a sense of I. Or what about various individual minds, such as the sensation or the feeling, a pleasant feeling or a pleasant sensation, or a suffering feeling, an unpleasant sensation? What about those? So when we're feeling happiness or we're feeling pain, suffering, are those individual consciousnesses, is that our I? And again here we see that, hang on, these come and go. Independence on coming into contact with various causes. For example, if we're cold, a suffering feeling or an unpleasant sensation arises. So that cannot be our independent self, because that consciousness comes and goes. And this independent self doesn't seem to come and go, where it's not only when we suffer that we feel a sense of self-identity. Likewise with happiness. So here we need to investigate our variety of consciousnesses. The sense consciousnesses, such as the eye and the ear and the smell sense consciousnesses, all five of those, as well as the variety of mental consciousnesses. And see if in any of them this independent self, the self that appears to be independent, can be found. And we'll see that no matter how strongly we identify with a particular mental quality, that mental quality cannot be our independent self, because it comes and goes in dependence on causes and conditions and so forth. So here too, just like with our analysis in our physical aggregates, when we look at our mental aggregates, this independent self cannot be found.
That in Madu Chinachine, that in the end, I get that number Sheba said. Then I get number Sheba said, Pajin, that number Sheba, the number Sheba, E number Sheba, Yoruba, just a E number Sheba, Danga Rebe Lamna, just a E number Sheba said, down the E number Shella Tara Mongo, just a man, Rapa Tige, down to Sheba, Maimba Tonga, and Gasam Jelia, number Sheba, E number Sheba, Tamo, the Ligero, just a E number Sheba Tamo, the E number Sheba Tamo, the Arebe Lamna. Just now said the Jing of someone now on Nashi, Gala Yamato Ranguni, Dubach now and Nashin Yubaina, Gala Yamato Ranguni, Dubach Yubaina, number Sheba Tamodi, Kokiji Jiru, Kiji Amala, Tenichi Chimal, Chima, she's not Kijing Ama, the Chimal Gula Kiduga, number Sheba, Kijing Ama, the Chima Gula Kiduga, Guda Gela in the Dubayer. She's not Kijing Ama, the Guda Gela in the Duba and number Sheba the good and Yen in the Tutuvari. Just not had number Sheba Mare Carson, number Sheba the Gare Macarson. Not now on as you the good and Yen Gala Macoron when you drew the or you are unit Mevajor. Number Sheba the Guadra, Gabriel Anzukim, number Sheba and Anzuki Yamlin Chebana, Anji, number Sheba the Yar Toyada, Anjing Tiba Mango Chebana, number Sheba the Dur Droida, Yadu Droya Yungore, and the Gabriel, number Sheba the Nuvushu Cherry Chun Droya Yungore, and Jena, the Neza. Kijing Dandala number Sheba said, Yuadria, Shenda, Shella Dene, Debachida, and the Yuadroyaba, and the Yula Deba, and the Korongan, Kijing Amala Deba, Shazan Dune to Duma, the Maduba in Gala Maduba number Sheba Yungo, Mevaza, Dus in the Kicheva Chevaina, number Shebetene, Nasedi, near Mevar. Do said do Cheba Cheche, Kazam Chilia, and a then on to Gala, the Jing of Nawana in Ha said, sometimes Gala Mato Rangun when you Juba, now she now Nashing Adida, Zawagini Mindu, some big someone like Lord Charge or Vada, Zawagini Mindu, that Jizan Dinigi, Ran now and Nashing had Zawagini Mindu, don't watch Mother Mindu, some big Dinigi, some don't such Leo do, then Dadu Juba, Casanga, Nashi Majuba Toba, said, Temba Majuba Toba said, not Damia Patobas, Damia Patoba said, Diligorda, Jebachidi.
Continuing with the third point of the meditation, because the consciousness has many forms. So what about then that of the primary mental consciousness, which itself has many layers of subtlety? So if we go to the subtlest level, that which goes from lifetime to lifetime, so surely this is where our sense of self, the self that appears so vividly to be independent of our physical and mental aggregates, something that seems to be unchanging. So having these two characteristics, surely it must be this primary mental consciousness that goes from lifetime to lifetime. Surely it's to be found within there. Even when we investigate this subtle consciousness, our self that appears to be independent, that appears to be unchanging, cannot be found there, because this subtle primary mental consciousness that goes from lifetime to lifetime, it is independent. So the self, it is dependent. It is dependent on variety of moments of consciousness. Because this consciousness that goes from lifetime to lifetime has past moments of consciousness, and there are moments of consciousness that will follow. So therefore, this subtle primary mental consciousness that goes from lifetime to lifetime can be divided, it is dependent on parts, those parts being moments of consciousness. So therefore, our self-identity, our sense of self, our I, that appears to be independent of anything at all, cannot therefore be found on a mental consciousness that is dependent. So again, an independent self, independent of being influenced by anything at all, cannot be found within something that is dependent. So therefore, we cannot find the self here. The self which appears to us to be truly existent, which having these characteristics of being unchanging and independent. We cannot find it anywhere. Not in our physical aggregates, not amongst any of our variety of consciousnesses, whether it's feelings of happiness or suffering, whether it's a dream consciousness, a waking consciousness, a sense such as eyesight consciousness, or even in the subtle mental consciousness that goes from lifetime to lifetime. We cannot find the sense of self. The sense of self that appears so vividly to be unchanging. That always seems to be present, something that appears to be independent. It's empty of existing in this way. And this, in the meditation, when we've gone through these 3 steps, we come to this conclusion here that the self is empty of existing in the way that it appears. To express that differently, it's empty of existing truly, or to express it differently, it's empty of existing inherently. And this is the understanding of the selflessness of persons, or the emptiness of inherent existence.
Kalama to now, Nashi Yori, Simba, or Daddy Lono Shas, how Daddy Lo Loksheresha, who Meva Chiglia, Yori, some Zintusha, did Lo No Shas, did Lo Lokshereshas. Chesanda, Kolo Lokshe and Zang, Deshi, that to Chebachina, Na said now, Nashi Meva Ton Lodi, don't long when you do Lo Dena Dempa, Lo Deni, don't you to be lost at Lo Dena, but that deep long Manoa Reshas. Chesan deep Lodi Gom Negazi Gombe Shucher Tavena, that Lo Deshi. Kalama now and Nashi Yore, some Zimba, Bang two doos. Chesan deep bang the Mavasua do send how go you do. Tarpa said it, the Yore, say Yoba in the how go it. Chesan deep bang be bang the Mavasua do, said that dele bang the Tarayas do. Chesan deep bang so by Nanga to Yomo Guinea, then Yomo on Kovala Kia Lemon, Targus, Chesan Tarpa do, send that Tarpa Yoba the Gari how was in it. 다음에 또 제바치는 다음에 또 탈바 여바데 하고 두고 탈바 투기 여바다 탈바 여바데 신내 하고 그러마도 다음에 또 봐는 진년을 양아서 탈바 여래 생각서 켈림 받자마도 탈바 여바데 원에 하고 말이야.
Yeah, having gone through these 3 points in the meditation, we come to see that the self cannot be found. We started by getting a feel for how the self appears to us, and then we investigated, we searched for it, first in the physical aggregates and then in the variety of mental aggregates, or the varieties of awarenesses and knowers, and we came to see that that self cannot be found. And therefore, the self does not exist in the way that appears. This appearance of being inherently existent or truly existent, in other words, unchanging and independent. No such self can be found. So therefore, the consciousness that grasped at the self as existing in that way, the consciousness that is the consciousness of self-grasping, is grasping at a self as existing in a way that is not in accordance with reality. This consciousness that grasps at a self as being independent and unchanging is grasping at a self that is not in accordance with reality. Therefore, that consciousness is ignorance, is an ignorance. It is a wrong consciousness. And the consciousness or the awareness now that comes to realize this, that comes to realize that it is an ignorance that grasps at the self as being truly existent, and therefore that is a wrong consciousness. This realizing consciousness itself is a wisdom. It's a mind of wisdom. It is wisdom because it is in accordance with reality. And now the meditator realizes that the ignorance of self-grasping, the root cause of all our suffering, this ignorance of self-grasping, that leads to all our afflictions and contaminated karma and creates this suffering prison of samsara, we can attain liberation from this state. We can eliminate this root cause of all our suffering because we've realized that that root cause is a consciousness of ignorance. And we've realized this now because we have cultivated wisdom. Up to this point, the meditator will have known this. They will have received teachings and reflected on those teachings extensively. So they will have understood this. But that has always been theoretical. Now, with this realization, it's no longer theoretical. Now they know experientially that liberation is possible. Freedom from suffering is possible.
That Bendigo do Japan and Adi Meodu, Benada, said, and do Sinayomari and Chingayomari and Namena, Naya and the San Yuko who said in Chinyam and Chia Mindu, didn't I tarba to Lam Rim and then Amena, and then I tarba to Gures, and then Naching Church Yagore, and then I come Jaud Lam Minduas, Namor Minduas, Lamna, Nameva Maranga Yori Elarja. Naganis Yore Lamna. Ngadi pumbong abo kanchi palu taba zmi yores da de xin ang zo lo la nang yong de gan nang lo sang ngadi gang la ya ma do khorong wen ni du du de ke nang go de din nang wa na xin ngadi yo ma de chi de lo nga zo lo la nang wa na xin ngadi nang yu gang la ya ma do rang ngong wen du ba na nang wa na xin rang wen du du ge ngadi yo ma de an nga ga de yores ne ngadi xian chi le due ne due ba zami So going through the
process of these 3 stages of the meditation, we've come to realize first how the self appears, then having sought it, can't find it. It's empty of existing in the way that it appears. So we've come to an understanding and then a realization of emptiness. Now we come to the 4th point in the meditation. Here, then, does the self not exist at all? Do I not exist at all? Am I not existent? If that is the case, I'm not meditating. I have not realized anything. I cannot attain liberation from suffering, nor Buddhahood. So that would be a wrong consciousness. That would be mistaken. What we have realized is that the I that appears to us as being independent and unchanging, in other words, truly existent or inherently existent, that does not exist. We searched for it and we couldn't find it. And we came to a realization of emptiness. But someone was meditating. I was meditating. I am in the process of attaining or progressing towards the attainment of liberation. So there is an I that exists, but not that one that appears to the mind and is then grasped at by a mind of ignorance. So here in the 4th step, we have recognized already previously that the I that doesn't exist is the I that appears to be truly existent. So here we see how the I then does exist. And that is, as a mere imputation by mind, was only an imputation by mind. Mind imputing the sense of self, imputing an I. That's the only way that I exists, not inherently at all.
Andu said that in Denisa, Tanga said, Yoris and Garson Lupa Tabatsam, Shenchil, doing it to Batsam to your mother, Shale, Motiva, Gala, Motiva, Rang when you took to your mares. Says a Gala, Motiva, Rang when you drew Yoris and Benga, Yoris and Besamlodi, Tanga, Rashin doesn't. Kasanga Tatu to Basim, Dasim Maripa said it. Says a Delatina to get Nyomo Bashasan, yeah, the Dilico Eshere. Says Adanga. said in a Lupa Taba, some Jimbaji, now on a she, your mare, some how go by na, 나도 되셔 콘도데 게디 뉴뉴 주고래 배나 가서 디스로한테 배네 때대상 배는 기기 주 배니주 주도 저장 세요로 왔다 배네 나도 저게 세 근데래 로스 땅에 밀려도 남상 구교다요 차요로 왔다 내가 총아침만을 고치듯이 미민도 밀려도 고치르고도 미도 파도 고디 잡고 디나시 주디 기기 주 잡잡자 지세 디네 로로 나로 지금 로 샤샤베나 아주 밀려도 구교다야도 줘줘요 나 통하셔로 왔다 당한 저기 규균이 매간지게 당보 통화도 되는 통화도 된마 지금 남과 술도와 되는 쉬어봐이나 남사 지구도 남사 주주도 선배 삼는 기로와 세상은 저게 삼다 디디 중원에도 선배 삼는 기고래 세상이 중원에라래 삼고마다 주말에 삼고 말디갑소 나도 가서 나야들 왕실을 주나시 난거래 나지는 그 구유다도 나야도 중원에라도 삼고래 세상이 중원에라도 선배 삼로디 노주 샤되래 주마이 바치리아 주레 삼 진디고와 인디 나시 나도 나디 나이도 갈래마도 상원도 두바 낭되바 나시 가서 나와 나도 삼지디 디나신 집바차되래 다 되네게 진 당한 저기 주도 삼면도 아다도 주디데 두다 다 주디기 밀 소자네 빼두고 나즈당게 시그레서 하자 하는 저기 로화라 티체네 안지 주디 파 가와도 파 제지 파 심주제도 간선질레디 파스여도 교화시 냄지도 쨌는데 그 기기만 하고 그러와 하고도 다야 다 대신에 주제스면 빼 너도와 취시 쇼 너도 빼가 너샤 셈비다 주자기네 레면도 당에 대신아 주지도 좀 시나게 빼 시나게서다 빼 직고 구부레서 너샤 섬그러와 되거네 제가 네 섬그러와 제가 내내 하고요도 대시 주제 삼배 삼로도 빼 너샤 제가 네 오게가 삼제 되는 시나게다 남자 휴게서다 빼 너샤 셈비 삼로 신이 빼직 리그로와 되는 초월을 잡고 리그로와다 당연히 다는 주제 면도와 셈비 삼로 리그로와 네 제바 제주 주문에 리면도와 셈비 하고와 대당 하고에도 대시 삼로디 너트 휴제샤 셈비 너트 짐바 세우시 하고도 디나신 아좀 나세 제바 제시 나세데 칸라이마도 랑원의 주비 나세 자기네 민도 셈 통여도 대시 랑원의 주바 나와 나신 짐비로 벤 너트 휴제샤 셈비 삼로디 신을 두고와
This meditation then has 4 steps. First, we try and get a feel for how the self appears. Then, having seen how the self appears to be independent and unchanging, we search for such a self, because if it existed as independent, it should be found. And we look first, then in the second step of the meditation, the physical aggregates, and the third step, in the mental aggregates, or amongst the variety of consciousnesses. And then we come to realize that no such self can be found anywhere. And we then, in the fourth step of the meditation, we remind ourselves that the self that appears to be inherently existent does not exist at all, and that is an ignorance that grasps or believes that the self exists in this way. And it's that ignorance that is the cause of all our suffering, because it's from that all our afflictions come. Because this ignorance that grasps at a self as existing inherently, from that ignorance comes the wish for this self to have. Desire arises. This self to be protected from pain. Anger comes. So here we have realized that this doesn't exist, but there is an I that we can still talk of, the person that's meditating. I am meditating. And that is, that sense of self, though, doesn't exist in the way that it appears, but is merely imputed by mind onto the basis of our aggregates. And this understanding, or this realization, is a wisdom, because it's in accordance with reality. And it has realized emptiness, the emptiness of the self as existing inherently. And this is the contrary mind to the ignorance of self-grasping. These two minds are completely opposite. As we develop, therefore, this familiarity with this mind of wisdom, as it grows in strength within us, as our understanding of reality grows, our ignorance starts to weaken, This ignorance that we have such familiarity with since beginningless time progressively weakens, and therefore all the resulting afflictions, they weaken in terms of strength and frequency. Here then, so those are the 4 steps of the meditation. And here then it's good to remind ourselves of a famous analogy which shows exactly the result that comes from this meditation. If we leave here tonight, it's quite dark, and if in the shadows from a distant light, we see a shape, and this is and it looks like a snake, and we immediately seeing the shape, we believe there is a snake before us, and we know that in this area there are dangerous snakes. The natural response will be fear of pain, fear of death. But then, if we shine our torch onto this snake, we'll immediately see it's not a snake. It's a coiled rope, or perhaps these days you can buy really lifelike snakes in shops. Maybe some kid who was here playing, they just left their toy snake by a tree, and this led to great fear arising within us. Here, the torch serves as our wisdom, and as soon as it shines on this object that appeared to be so true, so real, and we realize that it's illusory, that it's fake, the resulting affliction of fear goes. We'll probably laugh, joy will probably arise, certainly relief. And this is similar with this meditation. Wisdom illuminating the darkness of ignorance, destroying all the afflictions that follow from ignorance. This is a meditation we need to engage in.
the dream mare gigri se rest na dream na dream mare some big so hot pe is some that in ko dream na mi le na some dream mare some go ko some ta ko ni gala na le dream na mi na la dream na ji ba re de nyama ha ko kan di dream mare some be no dream na le na some ta de no dream se because se wu ha ko sa ro 지부 디기다 고땅 보통 그 뒤로 두 삼지 어디 얘니 뒤지 두서는 그 주문에라 레선베 삼는 진디거로 와 제사디 그 제바자 하 먹어야 돼 너저 하 먹어야 돼 뒤로 와 제사디 주 말에 돼 제사디 나시래 땅 아주게 다음에 비기니 수기네 하 먹한데랑 아주 나서 삼다 나디 나와 나신주 랑원에 주바 나와 나 진디거래 다 다음에 제바체 다음에 하고 한데 또 사견 디게 가사디 나디 나와 나신 당 랑이 원이 주변 능거데 나와나지 어디 말해 삼죠 어디 그 나와자마도 디니 나와나 요 말해 삼고 삼노나라야 삼베카 키카레 살와 디니 인자니 또 다음에 또 한들 녀몽밖에 녀와차거래 제가 녀몽밖에 마도 한들 녀코 노트기로 숙침보여 봐서 내가 되네 되샤 콘도 녀몽 제디 망알리거와
Having had this experience once, then leaving here a following week, and if you're walking out with someone who's never seen that child's toy, which has inexplicitly still been left under the tree, if you both then see it again, being so lifelike, you'll both think that there's a snake. The person next to you will have the reaction you had previously. Fear will arise. They'll probably step back. They may even stop you from walking forward. But you've seen reality. You know this is a toy. No fear arises at all. Maybe you'll giggle at your friend, but no fear will arise within you. You'll both see the same object, but have a completely different reaction. Because one of you is fooled by the appearance, but you have an understanding of reality. So the position we find ourselves in now is that we still believe phenomena exist in the way that they appear. We believe that the self exists truly. It exists in the way that it appears to us. And therefore, the afflictions arise, and we believe that phenomena exist in the way they appear. But through engaging in this meditation repeatedly over a sustained period, we'll come to gain familiarity with the understanding of selflessness and all the implications that come from that. And as we develop this habituation to selflessness, to the understanding of selflessness, phenomena will still appear to us, or the sense of self and all phenomena will still appear to us to be truly existent. But our belief in that will start to weaken, or our grasping in that will start to weaken. And as we gain ever stronger familiarity, habituation to this wisdom understanding emptiness, our afflicted minds will weaken. We'll suffer less. We'll feel less pain. We'll bring less harm into the lives of others.
Tarpa togudu sebe tarpa dönige samlodi ki togudu sebe samlodi jaya da chesan tarpa togugunza tarpa sedi tobegi lam garis togudu koalgi yudi nyomo ba dasin denza di kyen garis tu hongne re mare ko sed jebachi nu jebache de dame bala jebache de da gibu dingi kabla nyamlen je tangbo nyamlen je dame bala jebache zo re chesan da dame ba tobigi 또 차바는 다음에 또 별로래야 제주도 냠바 고미야디 고미야 띵이 진다 신 하동 고미야디 다 기부 띵이 남냠는 제에게 쪼디 다 다음에 또 별로디 고미야래 땅 아주게 당보다 기부 띵이 남냠는 제 다음에 또 맞게 와서 델야 쪼가주게 다 다음에 또 별로디 계획이 된다라 제바체에 나서야 돼 간디스도 제상 가호도 간디스도 제바체에 돼 제바체 김천 삼다 제바체 소소로라 나와 간디스 난구도 삼다 나와 나신지 가호도 선 제바체도 제바체에 모두 기비 튕기가라 냠내제 차고 제도 제바체에도 제바체 다음에 또 별로래 가제 제바체는 다음에 또 별로래 타년이 루고로 제상 다음에 또 별로디 네 아주게 제바이나 타바더니글로디 빼 야고실래 두고라 지사다 데니기 코미에 쪼딩 아저기 다음에 봐도 별로 이 기부팅이가 타바등이로 세게 냠len 체들이 지사 디 냠len 약고 영화라 저 쪼다 타바도 구두 삼제 군노티 위협하시 디 안에다 타바 토야라 바르지 체케는 수레랍네 다세 마릭 받으제샤스 지사 다진 마릭 받들라 다 나와 나시지 두개 민두스 다동아 두신 풍부에 된도 제바제 초유에 된도 삼다 넘버십에 된도 풍부 삼다 두신 유다 땡진 제비 중화 삼다도 아니 거두신 삼다도 아주기 기부딩게 람리야 제공지고라 되네게 제공제도디 아주기라 아니 제게 다음에 버토피기 로디 게디 제바이네 되네 탈바세 토야두 셈비게다 셈딩기 아절야 템부실이 두고 타바 토야도 샘비로디 딜레트 거다 데네게 통해서 제라다 토야 여바하고나 데네 슈케기로 와다 제모 제바이나 소소게 톱사에 톱도 샘비 하고선 딜레 슈케기로 와다 디나지로 와다 가리나 레가이 가리나 가지고 캡상하시나 디 캡상 라와다 라기 여바다 세우지 하고서나 딜레 베즈 슈치마자다 제모이나 소소 톱야기 다 세우시고 하고 디진에 디 톱사에 샘비 김천 디진에 디진 이 톱사에 샘비게 삼로디 세우지 하고서는 딜레 베즈 슈치지로 와 디나 신데 당한적에 타바 토야기 하고요도 딜레 베즈 슈치엘이 거다 디네 가지나 디네 하고는 야 타발이야 타 녀르녀 줘야마도 마 둘둘 줘야 매래
Through going through these four steps of the meditation, repeatedly over a sustained period, receiving more and more teachings to add to one's knowledge base and strengthen one's meditation, the practitioner will then come to a profound understanding of selflessness. And when that understanding is of a profound level, it is then, as was said earlier, that they know that liberation is possible, not just in theory, but they know through their experience, through this cultivation of wisdom, that liberation is possible. And then such a practitioner here of intermediate capacity, or someone training in the practice that are shared with the practitioner of intermediate capacity, will then cultivate the union of calm abiding and meditative insight or penetrative insight on this object of emptiness of inherent existence. They have come to this point, though, through gaining knowledge and going through the 4 steps of this meditation repeatedly over a sustained period. So that's how they got to this point. And that's what we need to do then too. Starting with the first point of trying repeatedly in every meditation to see how the self appears, what the self-identity is, how it appears to us, and then search for the 2 steps of looking in the physical and mental aggregates, coming to see that it cannot be found, and fourthly, but is a mere imputation by mind. So this is the technique that those who have given rise to the genuine uncontrived mind striving for liberation go through. And we too need to do the same. We have the knowledge that the root cause of all our suffering is this ignorance of self-grasping. We have the knowledge of the various steps of the meditation to develop its contrary mind, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So this is what we need to do. And we're doing so repeatedly over a sustained period. We'll come to gain understanding, realization, and eventually that will be of a profound nature. And from the depths of our heart then we'll know liberation is possible. And at that point, we'll strive with every thought, no matter what we're doing. Our mind will be on reality, on emptiness, the goal of liberation. We'll just be like a talented sports person who knows that this competition or this race they're in is winnable. They can be the first to cross the line. They can win the cup, and with the same strength and vigor and determination and commitment that they train with, through our meditation, we will have given rise to a same determination, having turned away completely from distraction to mundane pleasures, distraction from mundane problems. We'll have given rise to this wide and expansive mind. We'll have a far-sighted outlook with an objective of true meaning.
Chizan tarpa dunyira sayadi, tarpa sayadi, nyomo ba sabana jeba pangba dila tarpa sigure. Chizan dinigi tarpa dunyiri, tarpa thobala bardu chayane karesine, dasi marikba sayadire. Chizan anzuki nyomo ba kiye zayu dire, di meba suyo kukure. Di nyomo ba kiye dire, lesa kowala kiye gyuzo de danganzu dasi marikba di sayadi, dahas nga sayadi, kaala hemado rangmuni juba nawanda yore simbi zimbadi dasi marikba de. Anzu kowa koya kiye gyuzo dire, nyomobaje gyuzo dire chesa ndipangu gores ndipangpala dip zimbana shinji due mindu kola jeba chegoro ko de dembare mindu chesa jeba chedu ko zimbana mebada 통고로 chesa dine enza ko dine ko gyuen ba ko nori ba thongdo da ko kelen jingmaro da nga kyu chistrume da kyu mogos pa bi goro an dine enza ndigie chemboro chawe za jinga jugiti da jibu tingi lam nyamlen jedang komna so di nyamlen chede chesa di dire di share ma din ma sabaloya ma jore din ma loya di karesne da di karesne dinige tarba donye samlo shukchimu gebala ngazu khowale gyön 통고래 재상 코알의 gyön 통하자 코알의 gyön 디디디레세 gyön 뭐지 gyön데 영어 쳐야 돼 gyön디기 시고로 받더니 마셔야 돼 아주 밀리 깨베나 가가 되는데 gyön되는데 여기서 gyön이 시야 돼 다들 재상 gyön 시야 돼 가서는 델레데 타고 우두선 배삼을 깨야 된다래 재상 타바 등일로 깨야 된다 재상 타바 등일로 깨발라 타바 등일로 세대 가는 레그리에서는 대시 셔바 나지 뇽모 바사보다 제바 빵바데 탈바데 디토구루 셈베 등일로디 타바 등일로레서 다 디토구게 등일람바데 삼로 슈처 땅발라 나주게 타바토에 발도 제가는 수익가고 그래서 다세 마릭바티 지고래 재산 디 짐바나신 타코 no to do him do Gyun Dele to some down the Yashan, that thing on to do some time to share it. The name is the down now getting a sausage boat to be in Neda, Chitita, Susan setting us your as and said some nothing setting around to the said, Kanish do some pedambo, someone and said, Nilola Kanish Nangu, some big do chick some star. Down none of the said, Pumpo de, my by Shada, Chick Corchi Hidiba, Corong when you do Gala Matiba, Corong on Hidiba, do is Nangor, then do Chimjina, yes, Rapara, Nangor. She said, Dina, and your some Zindigore, indeed, doesn't Mariba said, yes. Down Bocorona Lodi, said the Kanish Nangu, Kanish do some be some down with the Gachmachawa. This how was on a Dinish Nangu, Kalamarang when you drew by Nangu. Now, Nangu, some Dinish do some Belolia Chayo by now, or that thing I did, Taka to stop Pumbo del do him do. Then Pumbo Pa Chilone Omarwa, that Yena de Yongore, and Yena, that Pumbo di do medicine, Sui Pumpo de Jebachiata. Then Nang Shepa on Shele Jebache, Nang Shepa, Yi Shepa Jebache, or do Jebache, the Rimbadi di Chagorwa. And the negative, I don't want to get that in something you think it's a just tiny Yungruva. The name that the drinking of the Chebacheta Corke did do some chip. She said, they get more child, they lawyer chumas, in a day. Is that Yamachis Millereba, Loma Sava Chileres, Chis Millereba, Legend, Lama, and dealing our church in our church, Shiva Reggie, Lomadi. And Jis Millereba Church, our Sonama, other degrees, and dealing Kurama, Nangma, Shalma, Dorje, Kuranga. 결혼 제주 다주 결혼 가고도 야 직제바 제제 안 산이 쇼라 해지래. 제상 고 마도제 능 하세데 가고도 스파 지직 제상 하세 다데 가고도 고 제바제도 제데다 제바지는 아균이 마송하시. 데 제바지도 고 대신가서 셰바는 수당 낭 셰바당 강게 되는 예매된 지지도 하세데 다오기니 미두섬제. 제상 산이들 야름 제스 밀러를 받죠. 야 짜데. 한 제스 밀러를 베게 야겔람 로마들이야. Nganye songs, now all the years songs, yeah, can aresu. Jessa didn't lomadi. Hasia, they could some not Gazeta and Hasia talking name into songs. Oh, did it, that may was serious. That she named did some down for a soon. Jesu Miller was a Lama Lomachik, Chen Naro, Chase and Drover. That chooses Jesu Miller Carson lesson. Curon Dirma Nan Shal Madro do shows. Curon Gaudu, Zeshe down shows, Gaudu, Curon Zeshe down shows in Maganare. Then Madro Shal Madro, Kongagaudu, and Zish Damar, that's also long, the Jin and Soman Shebanaji, Nas, Lol, Canis Nang, now and Gadi, Pumpolo Due, now Shevet in the Due, Jebachitu, Guinea Maniva, Echere. Jizada has a Jebat in the Guinea Maniva Donsan Chowder. Not that me but also. She's on Sani Yalamazilia Judge and Jis Miller was my son, you way Yajarwa. Chadu Jis Miller Biggie. Not yes, yes. Joran Kasan at Zijutan Zero and Nago, yes, yes, Paki Chibari. Yes, me, Jala, yes, the Jing at Zijutan Larua, and yes, that Sani Kasan del Matzijutan Gaudu Zesho Larua. That's in it, that you need money barwa. She's a ya Jis Miller. Oh, Kasan Kuran, I knew some yes, Sugar, now I cannot. She's a Lomadi. Oh, that thing had it, Zijutan, Union has in talking Yeminus. She's not too Zijutan and has a Yem, don't such about the Yeminus, Yeminus, Yemason Sorish. Ya Sugar. Then Jis Miller. Oh, the dearest, that mebas a dearest, Chunam Gyatso, di Gombu was. She's not Rashi Matubas, di Gombu was. She's not that you're on details as a trade did it. That is military this one.
Our time together has come to an end. That too is impermanent. So let's summarize then what we've looked at tonight. So we started with recapping, as we always do, on what we looked at last week, and we spoke about the meaning of liberation or the meaning of freedom. So what is it that a practitioner strives to be freed from or to be liberated from? And that is the afflicted minds. Because it's these very afflicted minds, as we saw again tonight, that create our own individual samsara. Our own afflicted minds create our own samsara. They are the fetters, the chains that bind us in our own prison of samsara. They are the bars on the window of our own prison of samsara. And these afflicted minds have as their root cause the ignorance of self-grasping. Then tonight we looked at in detail then the meditation to eliminate, to destroy, to completely uproot and eradicate this ignorance of self-grasping, this root cause of all our pain and suffering. We looked at the meditation that leads to the cultivation of the wisdom realizing emptiness, or the wisdom realizing selflessness. This is the technique by which liberation is achieved. It's through developing an understanding of reality, an unmistaken understanding of reality, that our ignorant way of interacting or relating is completely eradicated. It's through cultivating this wisdom, the wisdom that realizes emptiness or selflessness, that we come to see that phenomena do not exist in the way that they appear. The self doesn't exist in the way that it appears. Our sense of self-identity doesn't exist in the way that it appears. And as we gain familiarity with this wisdom, to that extent, we no longer are fooled by appearances, fooled by the way phenomena appear to us. We are no longer deceived because of the cultivation of wisdom. In order for this meditation to be successful, we have to develop a great determination, a great strength of mind. And how to do so? We looked at that last week, and we'll look at it again next week. It's through reflecting on the sufferings of samsara, or the faults of cyclic existence, that we'll come to see how suffering pervades our experiences. And in this way, we'll give rise to a burning desire to be free of samsara, because we'll understand that samsara is pervaded by suffering, and that there's nothing worth striving for that is to be found within samsara. There's no happiness worthy of longing for within samsara. So this is giving rise to the wish for liberation, because we're wishing to be liberated from suffering. But for that wish to be liberated from suffering to be truly transformative, we have to give rise to the wish to be freed from the causes of suffering, the afflicted minds. And that's what we looked at tonight. The cause of our suffering is the afflicted minds, in particular ignorance. And we looked at the method for attaining liberation from that. So hopefully there we see the link between tonight's talk and last week's. And then next week we'll continue to look at this. But the key point in our summary then tonight is, if you take away from tonight's class to go home, reflect on the sufferings of samsara as we looked at last week, then to add to your meditation, to look at how the self appears. Try to get a feeling for how the self appears, that it has these characteristics of being independent, so not influenced by anything at all, and unchanging. And this I'd encourage you to do in your meditation and throughout your activities. So whenever you're not, your mind isn't dominated by activity, when you've got a moment, just think, how's myself appearing right now? Because this first step of the meditation is difficult to get a real feel for how the self appears. Then in your meditation, when you've got some sense of how the self appears, look for it in the physical aggregates, then in the mental aggregates, and then the fourth step of the meditation was to see, having seen that the self doesn't exist in the way that it appears, but there is a self that exists, and that is merely imputed, or only imputed by mind onto the basis that is the aggregates. So that I'd encourage you, have these two components of your meditation, sufferings of samsara, leading to the wish to be freed of samsara, and then meditate on selflessness to eliminate the cause of all our suffering. And if we do this repeatedly over a sustained period, as our familiarity grows, we will be less and less fooled by appearances, deceived that things exist in the way that they appear, and therefore our desire to have them or our aversion to them will weaken, because we will no longer believe they exist in that way. And I'll just end then with a story. Many centuries ago, Milarepa was asked by he's requested by a student, please teach me the Dharma. So Milarepa replied to him, go back to your room and look for yourself. And then when you found yourself, come back tomorrow, or when you found yourself, come back and tell me about the self that you found. So this meditator went to their room and looked for their self. And they looked in the way that was described tonight in the body. They looked in the various mental consciousnesses, couldn't find the self. Then eventually they returned to their teacher, to Milarepa, and said, I looked everywhere, not here, not there, nowhere. I couldn't find the self at all. And Milarepa said, that is it. You are meditating on selflessness. This is your primary meditation. Look for the self. See if it exists in the way that it appears or not. So thank you. We'll finish there then for tonight.